Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. I apologize for my voice today. I lost it on a recent trip to Dubai. As you guys all know, I'm one of the leading experts in anti-dolphin warfare in the world, and the city of Dubai basically contracted me to help them with security at their port facilities. As you guys all know, the rising sea levels have basically encouraged the dolphins to aggressively expand outside of their normal territories, Dubai being one of those places. Anyway, today I want to take a break from our Clone Wars history series. This is something I want to do maybe every 3 episodes just to change up the pace. Today I want to talk about basically the backstory of one of the most important characters in the Clone Wars, and that's Anakin Skywalker. Now, not much is really known about Anakin Skywalker and what his training was like between episode 1 and episode 2. This is a roughly 10-year span in which the young slave from Tatooine went from being a child to a very talented young Padawan. Previously, there were a few Legends comics and novels that kind of cover this period of history. There's the Star Wars Jedi Quest series and also Rogue Planet, the latter of which ties in neatly to the Yu Zhang Vong arc for those who are interested. While these novels are no longer really canon, they do impart some important messages, including establishing the relationship between Anakin and his master Obi Wan Kenobi, which by all means is not a very orthodox relationship. Now, in the Disney canon, there haven't been any novels that go in depth into the subject just yet, but there have been several comics that have covered the adventures of Obi Wan Kenobi and Anakin, including the recent Age of Republic miniseries. So today we're going to be delving into those comics and some other sources to better explain to you what Anakin was like as a Padawan in his early years at the Jedi Temple. To begin with, we have to start at the end of Qui Gon Jinn, an unorthodox master who saw something special in Anakin. Qui Gon Jinn was always one step away from being declared a heretic by the more strict members of the Jedi Councils. His view on the living force and the cosmic force were quite radical, and for the latter part of his life, he pursued a way to truly become one with the force. He would be one of the first Jedi in the late Republic era to maintain his consciousness even after death. It was the same out-of-the-box thinking which made him consider Anakin as an apprentice. During this time period in the Jedi Order's history, there were strict guidelines put into place about how young a Jedi could be before they began training. For the most part, most Jedi were taken away from families at an extremely young age. The idea was to start training with a blank slate, devoid of any attachment or memory of a former life, family, or friends. One could say that the Jedi sought to indoctrinate and even brainwash their young charges from an early age. When Anakin was brought before the Jedi Council and tested, they determined that Anakin was indeed more powerful than any other Force user they had ever encountered during this time period. But they also sensed much fear in the boy and attachment to his mother, something that made them wary of the young boy. Training an older boy like Anakin would be risky because he had come to the Jedi Order with his own experiences and views of the world. Yet the alternative, I would argue, is just as terrifying. A boy with his power would eventually learn to use the Force no matter what happened, and should he encounter the wrong people like a Dark Jedi or even a Sith Lord, well, he could very quickly fall to the dark side. Nonetheless, the Jedi Council, set in their ways, refused to allow Qui Gon Jinn to train Anakin. But Qui Gon Jinn, being a boss and the patron saint of young women captured by human traffickers, essentially tells him to go to hell and takes him on as apprentice anyway. When Qui Gon Jinn dies at the hand of Darth Maul, with his dying words, he passes on the responsibility of Anakin to his own Padawan, Obi Wan Kenobi. Another unorthodox move on Qui Gon Jinn's part. But as a true believer of the prophecy of the Chosen One, perhaps Qui Gon Jinn most likely had resigned himself to fate. This also meant that he probably believed that no matter what happened, Anakin's destiny was clear. Qui Gon Jinn also recognized great potential in his own Padawan Obi Wan Kenobi and probably recognized some similarities between Obi Wan and Anakin. Obi Wan Kenobi was able to catch the much more experienced duelist Darth Maul off guard and managed to defeat him, a feat that made him, in the eyes of the Jedi Council, worthy of the title of Jedi Knight. The Council eventually agrees to honor Qui Gon Jinn's request and allows Obi Wan Kenobi to train young Anakin. In Legends, we know that Anakin was given his own room in the Jedi Temple, a room that he filled with machines, droids, and other mechanical parts that he liked to toy around with. Anakin had a real affinity for machines. That was kind of a bit odd for Jedi. Strangely enough, another Jedi who liked to tinker with machines and droids when he was young was Obi Wan Kenobi. That's not where the similarities would end, as a youngling Obi Wan Kenobi also dreamed of being a pilot, despite later on hating flying. Also at a young age, Obi Wan Kenobi, like Anakin Skywalker, was a very quick learner, and they both shared this trait as younglings of being very impatient and almost arrogant. These similarities with his Padawan allowed Obi Wan Kenobi to better understand Anakin, but still Obi Wan Kenobi felt uneasy with being Anakin's master. This had little to do with the young boy, but more to do with Obi Wan Kenobi's own insecurities. Obi-Wan had felt like he was unready to become a Jedi Knight, let alone gain an apprentice as powerful and unorthodox as Anakin. But Obi Wan Kenobi had loved his master and felt duty-bound to train young Anakin, but sorely missed Qui Gon Jinn's guidance in how to become a master. Obi-Wan's hesitation was sensed and oftentimes misinterpreted by Anakin, who also felt uneasy about being trained as a Jedi. Like his master, he blamed himself, seeing himself as unworthy of being a Jedi. After all, it was well known in the Jedi Order that the Council had initially refused to train him. The other Jedi younglings also saw Anakin as an outsider. They had all grown up with each other, while Anakin had arrived on his own at the age of 9. Despite all this, Anakin did excel in most of his classes. He had some problems forming a connection with sentient animals, but that is, of course, something that he would have to deal with a lot later on in life, and something that he will eventually master. But yeah, basically, he was as powerful as Qui-Gon predicted he would be. In some ways, his power intimidated his fellow Jedi, and even Obi Wan Kenobi at times. It also didn't help that he was the chosen one. This was a label that really shaped all of his interactions with the other Jedi and also the Jedi Masters, and Anakin came to distrust a lot of the Jedi Masters, especially the ones that sat on the Council, and denied him apprenticeship in the first place. It was because of this lack of connection with everyone else that Anakin grew closer to Obi Wan Kenobi. Now, despite his incredible skill and power, Anakin still idolized Obi Wan Kenobi, oftentimes claiming that no one was better than his master. Their relationship was very touching. It was like that of a father and a son, and later on, when he grew older, like that of two brothers. It was this positive relationship he had with his master that kept his mind off his mother, who was still in captivity, something he was quite bitter about. The Jedi fully had the capability of saving her, and it was hard for young Anakin to justify their reasons for not doing so. Even as a preteen, Anakin was an incredibly skilled fighter. He was easily on par with some of the better Jedi Knights in the Order. But Obi Wan Kenobi was hesitant to bring him on a mission because the young boy was still quite emotionally unstable. His force powers had clearly outpaced his ability to control himself. In Legends in the novel Rogue Planet, Anakin is threatened by a blood-carver assassin. Without any weapons at his disposal, Anakin kills the alien with a pure fit of rage through the Force, burning him from inside out. This event would be his first kill, and it would severely shock the 12-year-old. Anyway, in canon, sensing the young boy's restlessness and Obi-Wan's hesitation, Yoda asks Obi-Wan to take young Anakin on a mission to recover holocron on the planet of Dalinor. It turns out this is exactly what the Master and Apprentice needed. Young Anakin was more than ready to leave the Jedi Temple, where he was basically being scrutinized by all the Jedi Masters and judged by his peers. In a tender moment between the two, Anakin asked Obi-Wan Kenobi what his life was like before he joined the Jedi. Obi-Wan answered by saying he didn't really remember much because he was extremely young when he had joined the temple. Anakin confides in Obi-Wan that he worries that unlike his master, he had once been a slave, and perhaps that is why the Jedi Council saw him as unfit for being a Jedi. Obi-Wan quickly cuts him off and responds by saying that the Jedi Council wasn't always perfect. This is a really important part of their relationship. You see, Obi-Wan Kenobi senses that Anakin is being pushed away by the rest of the Jedi Order, and he really wants to prove to Anakin that he's on his side and that he has someone he can depend on. Later on, we find out that even if Anakin had been kicked out of the Order or left for some reason, Obi-Wan still would have followed Anakin out of the Order, partly because of his promise to Qui Gon Jinn, but partly because of his own affection for the boy. Anyway, during the mission, the two successfully recover the Jedi holocron and defeat a band of pirates. Anakin is momentarily taken for hostage in the middle of the battle, but manages to use the Force to free himself from the grasp of the pirates. Of course, Anakin, always being incredibly hard on himself, feels like he failed by allowing the pirates to get a jump on him, further feeding into his own insecurities. But Obi-Wan Kenobi once again steps in and interrupts him by saying that it's not really Anakin who's unworthy, but it's he who is unworthy at training Anakin. Realizing this, the two come to the conclusion that they actually must learn from each other, as they both had much to learn about being both a master and apprentice. In canon, we know Anakin receives his first lightsaber at the age of 12. Not much is known besides the fact that Obi-Wan Kenobi tells him that his lightsaber is his life. This is something that Anakin doesn't really seem to take to heart. In Legends, we get a little more detail. Anakin gets his lightsaber at the age of 13 when he journeys to Ilum, like all the other Jedi younglings did, to undergo a trial to make his first lightsaber. During this trial, Anakin encounters a lot of his internal fears and attachments. He's greeted, of course, by visions of his mother, who is vulnerable as ever and under danger. He also sees Darth Maul, the man who had killed his first master. In his vision, Anakin duels Maul and eventually does defeat him, but not before Maul warns that his soul will forever be tainted with the darkness beyond his control. This is something that really shakes Anakin to the core, and it's something that will affect him throughout the rest of his life. It's also perhaps why in canon, Anakin would go on to construct a sparring robot who resembles and fights like Darth Maul. At the time, the Sith assassin, despite his demise, represented the ultimate threat to the Jedi Order. While sparring one day, Chancellor Palpatine witnesses the boy's extraordinary skills. Palpatine, of course, had helped create Anakin under the tutelage of Darth Plagueis, and was in a really twisted way Anakin's father. One day, Palpatine requested that Anakin accompany him on a mission to the underlevels of Coruscant without his master Obi-Wan. Palpatine wanted to begin his mentorship of Anakin and wanted to show him the corruption that was rotting the Republic from within. On the level 2685, Anakin witnesses senators gambling away public funds and consorting with all types of lowlives. It was here Anakin would start to develop his own world views and political views, under the careful guidance, of course, of Palpatine. And these were views that would later on develop into something a bit more extreme, as we'll see in Episode 2.
I don't think the system works.
How would you have it work?
See, Obi Wan Kenobi and the rest of the Jedi really try to stay away from politics, which is really the official Jedi Order's view on what politics were. There was a separation between the Jedi Order and the Senate, even though the Jedi Order served the Senate. Now, at the end of their journey to the lower levels, Palpatine questions Anakin, wondering if he was happy with his life path as a Jedi. Anakin, of course, replies that he was, but a seed of doubt is implanted within him. After the mission, Anakin confides in Obi Wan Kenobi and asks to leave the Jedi Order and turns over his lightsaber. He's kind of uncomfortable with the fact that his entire life was already chosen for him at the age of 9. But before he's able to resign, Anakin and Obi Wan Kenobi are asked to go to Carnelian 4 by Yoda for a mission. Upon arriving on the planet, the Jedi's ship hits debris and breaks apart. The two Jedi find themselves trapped in a furious battle between two local factions. Obi Wan Kenobi gives Anakin his lightsaber back so that he can properly defend himself. Upon seeing the destruction that had been created in the world, Anakin asks how the Republic could have allowed this to happen. Obi-Wan answers perhaps a bit too bitterly that the Senate didn't need anything on the world and therefore failed to intervene, further reinforcing Anakin's negative view on the Senate. Anakin then asks why the Jedi can't do anything about it, to which Obi-Wan Kenobi answers the Jedi ultimately answer to the Senate, and it's not up to them to really question what they do. Obi-Wan continues to explain that the Jedi weren't really an army and they were too few in number to be wielded with such blunt force. Instead, they had to really inspire and teach the galaxy to be good and just. Obi-Wan Kenobi then acknowledges that the whole system isn't perfect. Now, the war on Carnelian 4 waged between two factions, the open and closed. Years of fighting had left the planet completely devastated, poisoned, and cut off from the rest of the galaxy. Much of the technology that had once been on this planet was lost, and most people were now living as scavengers. Also, none of the people on Carnelian 4 had ever heard of the Jedi. Now, the Jedi find themselves stranded with members of both factions and must find a way to make a peace between both parties in order to survive. During the journey, Anakin ultimately finds purpose again in being a Jedi, and ultimately helps end the war on the planet by helping his master contact the Republic. He even manages to save his master from certain death, something that he'll do multiple times in the near future. Now, at the end of this ordeal, Anakin is asked again by Obi Wan Kenobi if he wants to leave the Jedi Order. Anakin has a change of heart and now decides to stay. Now, as we mentioned before, even if Anakin had left, Obi Wan Kenobi would have left without him. Such was the bond between these two. So you can't really tell the story of Anakin Skywalker, the Padawan, without telling the story of Obi Wan Kenobi, the Master. And the bond between these two, as you can see, was incredibly special. And that's what really makes Revenge of the Sith, the events that happen at the end of that movie, so just terrible and heartbreaking. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below. In our next episode, we'll be continuing our Clone Wars history, so stay tuned for that. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.